Yes.
I was in first news. Just
Okay.
came.
Good. Yep, we are live, sir.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Pebble, a startup podcast, which is specially built around startups in deep tech and entrepreneurs who are making the news. Today, we're going to analyze the union budget for 2022. By the way, it is budget number 23 for the 21st century. And many of you in the startup world would be wondering what next for you. Is it going to provide you tax breaks and various subs for your industry? Unraveling the budget for us are Ravindra Krishnappa, managing partner of July Ventures, Suresh Narasimha, founder of CoCreate Ventures, and my friend Siddharth Pai, co-founder of 314 Capital. Siddharth, how are you? Siddharth and everyone, all well?
All well.
Okay, Siddharth, what's with the shenanigans in the budget, man? I mean, reminded me of a song from Funkadelic. It's called One Nation Under a Groove, right? She said, the finance minister said, one nation, one registration, one market, one tax. Your analysis, gentlemen. Over to you, Siddharth and Ravi. Suresh, you can add.
No, sure.
Siddharth, go on.
So I think the first thing the government should actually be, the government has actually kept its words, especially when it comes to startups, because what's actually happened, Vishal, as you know, is that Indian startups, Indian startup investors, as well as Indian startup shareholders actually pay a tax rate that is 2.4 times the rate that their listed counterparts actually end up paying. Now that entire rate, that entire tax that actually applies over here as of now is actually a track on direct investment actually going into these companies and actually creating economic growth and economic prosperity and jobs. Whereas the stock market, in the words of the famous John Maynard Keynes, is actually a beauty contest in itself. The money goes from one investor's pocket to another investor's pocket, and the economy can actually continue, has very little impact on what the stock market is actually doing. Indeed, you've seen even during COVID, where the economic activity actually decreased, the stock market very crazily actually started increasing during that entire period of time. So that distance and divorce from reality is something that actually was very strong. Now, even if it is one asset, so the long-standing ask of the Indian startup ecosystem has been exactly to the words of your song: one security, one tax. If I invest in listed market or unlisted market, I actually want to pay the exact same tax rate. Unfortunately, these distortions exist. But kudos to the government for actually taking a positive step forward, where they've actually said, look, the surcharge that applies on the listed market, no matter what gains you make, is actually capped at 15%. Whereas in the unlisted market, it actually went as high as 37%. So what they said is, look, we understand let's treat all long-term capital gains equally. Let's actually keep the capital gains rate at 15% itself. So that's actually one. For anyone looking to invest into startups, this is actually the most beneficial tax regime you can possibly find up to date for actually making those particular investments itself. That becomes one. The second, which I think is actually a huge step forward in terms of reducing ambiguity, is the fact that crypto was actually mentioned in a positive light by the government. In a positive light, I mean that they haven't actively worked to actually ban it. They've actually done the smarter thing that governments the world over have done, which is actually tax it. See, here's what common economic theory is actually taught all of us. The moment you try banning any sort of fundamental human impulse, you don't actually drive it away. You just actually drive it underground. At the moment it goes underground, it can't actively contribute to the economy. So the government was smart in terms of actually taxing crypto, which a large number of people already have holdings on, but taxing it in an extremely stringent manner. And that particular tax actually that will actually positively contribute to the nation's coffers. I will actually set the rails for India to actually start creating regulations around crypto itself. Because see, as all of us know right now, this is going to be the decade of the digital, if you actually ask me. In 2030s, the physical boundaries of physical geography is actually going to become even less relevant, and digital sovereignty will actually come to the forefront itself. Now, if you actually think about it, the army that's actually going to fight in this particular digital world is actually going to be your engineers and your coders. 30% of all the founders in the valley currently are either Indian or Indian origins by themselves. The question that the government should actually ask is, why are we so intent on actually exporting our best minds overseas? Let's actually create a conducive climate for our best companies to actually stay here. And legitimizing crypto, which by consequence actually creates a favorable environment for Web3 companies to actually come and start building up here, will actually be essential to India's digital sovereignty in this particular decade itself. So this I actually see as a positive step forward. In spite of the fact that technically speaking, crypto is always liable to tax, the fact that they created a separate framework showed the government's intention of actually doing that. And the RBI actually issuing a digital rupees, that's going to be a huge step forward. The applications you can possibly create on top of that will actually end up becoming endless. And I foresee a large number of governments worldwide actually creating their own digital cryptocurrencies and the existing cryptocurrency set will actually become more of an investment or an asset class as opposed to the currency by itself. That tussle will actually underscore the rest of the coming decade itself. So that's actually the second takeaway that I've actually seen from the budget.
Okay, Ravi, Suresh, you want to add to this? I want you to keep this in mind also, guys, that fiscal deficit is going to grow up. I'm only worried that will it create inflationary conditions for us in the long run?
We'll kind of address that in a minute.
Yeah, Ravi, go on.
I have 2 points to make to Sid, and then Sid is going 100 miles an hour. I need to figure out how to catch up on this, right? So, couple of things. Very, very well made on the taxation of unlisted securities in terms of it. But Sid, just a point. The tax rate has not changed, right? It's just the surcharge.
Only the surcharge.
So it's 20%. So for people who don't realize, the normal listed security is 10% long-term capital gains. This is 20% long-term capital gains. And the surcharge, which used to be as high as 37%, is now capped at 15%. So in the net effect is probably about, depending on where you are, it could be as low as 2%, or it could be as high as 16% net change in the pieces of what you pay, right? So that's one point. The second one, I think, while I address the second one on the crypto side, I think great move that there is recognition. I agree the CBDC from an Indian rupee perspective is fantastic because it gives the equivalent of an Indian stable currency, a stable cryptocurrency that you can play around with, right? Yeah. What you make out of it, I think, is slightly different. And there, I think for the first time, I will tell you where I was impressed. I was impressed that for the first time in a budget speech, you have the finance minister talking about API and talking about platforms.
Yeah, she talked about what 3-4 stacks, the health stack, the logistics
there's
stack.
Talk about the Ayushman Bharat, which is the health stack. Talking about the supply chain platforms that is getting built. You talked about the post office getting into the
banking interfaces.
Banking interfaces being worked. To me, those changes on the financial structure of integrating all of this is actually massive, right? And if you have the finance minister talking about UPI and then having somebody else follow up, I think that's a great platform to work on. So I actually see this as the first launch of a
API-driven economy.
Yeah,
API-driven India.
In fact, Ravindra, it was the first launch of India. I mean, today we could really believe that India is a startup country. That's how.
Right.
So those.
So very true. And the term digital was actually mentioned by the finance minister no less than 35 times. If you actually keep that in conflation with startups, with high tech, with drones and everything else, close to 60 to 70 mentions of the innovation economy itself in the budget. It clearly shows the government's actually committed to making this a decade of digital, and the government's actually putting it forward. And one more point of note that's actually very heartening to see. We've often seen in multiple budgets going back a large amount of time, where the government actually exhausts the private sector to actually start making investments and to begin the capital cycle in itself. Now, what we've actually seen the government do this time around, even though they throw down a challenge to the startups, they actually said, look, we'll actually fund you guys as well. We'll not just give you the problem.
Absolutely.
We'll actually create a framework and we'll give you capital. They've actually stated specifically that there's going to be a co-investment scheme by NABARD to actually ensure that companies can actually start making a positive impact. Deep tech as well, the climate action, pharma, a large number of these sectors are actually going to start seeing dedicated fund of fund mechanisms actually coming in. And increasing rupee capital participation is actually essential. Out of $40 billion raised by Indian startups last year, roughly about $4 billion actually came from Indian sources. India has become a mute spectator in the digital revolution that's actually happening as of now. And kudos to the government for actually taking the first step forward and saying, look, we don't mind actually giving the seed capital to actually start this off. I mean, that's fantastic. And that's actually going to hold the country in very good stead in this coming decade itself.
So we have a skilling platform also, no, Ravi? Skilling platform, agri platform. I mean, you're absolutely right.
So there are three things, right? Yeah. So the one is the agri platform, which is what we talked about. The second is the supply chain piece. So if you look at it in detail, there is the big piece on the multimodal transport and the ability to go and provide an API where we talk about the transport processes that go in. So essentially what you're doing is you're bringing the logistics structure, right? On top of that, you overlay the infrastructure going into supply chain, right? Whether it is, I mean, for the first time, you have a Kisan piece where you go in and say that I'm going to have a Kisan drone and I'm going to fund a Kisan drone, right? That, while that may seem a bit, it actually puts in the effect that ours is a widespread country that has demand-supply inequalities that are spread, that need to be bridged from a supply chain perspective, right? So whether it is at the agri side, whether it is across on the multimodal pieces, whether it is the quadrilateral piece that you're building out, very, very clear layer of impact on the ground in terms of a supply chain.
Suresh, you must be very happy, right? You go on, Ravi, go on.
One piece that I think you're making.
Please.
And for the first time, I was very pleasantly surprised to see that there's going to be a 25% of defense spend put out towards some of these particular pieces, right? Now, if you think about it, that was so you now go and set targets, which means that it's a good piece that people, somebody like a BEL or somebody like a Bharat Dynamics have to go in and say that this is what I have been able to pull together. Now, it may be a large target because I don't know if we have the ability to do the 25%, but you link that 25% to the PLI, which is the incentive scheme that you will launch. I think we have the basis of trying to make something big out of this.
Okay, Suresh, this must be music to your ears because what? After so many years of funding deep tech companies, you're finally thinking that this is the right time for my startups to go participate in the industry, right? You must be mighty happy.
No, I think the good thing today is the messaging, right? Messaging or the noise or what the government is talking about it, right? So, devil is always in the details, okay? We will see what will come out, etc. But it was it's a very, very reassuring thing for anyone who is in the startup world to listen. Look, I'm in the right company, right? So I don't think any budget would have been used innovation as many times as the finance minister did. So from the macro perspective, from vision setting perspective, probably this is a dream budget that look for. Not only that, I think another point which there are 2-3 things that I really loved other than the digital health stack, which was extremely interesting to come up now. I think the whole aspect of post offices becoming digital bank, right? So I don't think anyone would have imagined something like that move so fast. And it's almost like government has another IPO in stock over next 3-4 years, right? In the right, so where they are trying to create a value, right? That's one. And then probably what Ravindra would have loved is the whole discussion around closing up companies.
Absolutely. 2 years to 6 months. I would love it to be faster. But I think that's
6 months now. It's 6 months. In the old days, you could never close a company in India. You just kept it.
On paper, it was 2 years. Now that's kind of reduced to 6 months. But yeah, that's it's a need, right? Because you will not believe the number of companies that some of us are directors are, which is just filing just for the heck of it, right?
Correct.
Nothing else to do except to keep it live. You mentioned the other side. While we talk about the balance, I think the real challenge now is, as you said, related to the inflation, right? If you look at it, 25 roughly, I don't know what, 33-35 paisa of whatever is going to come in out of every rupee is coming from borrowed is getting
absolutely
in some sense, right? And on top of that, you have some of these schemes that are supposed to be the offset scheme. So if you think about the universal service obligation, there's a 5% on all telecom operators that is sitting out, which talks about, for mobile infrastructure build in the remote areas. While this is great on paper, my only concern is that something that we need to watch out for from an inflationary perspective.
This is where I want to bring in Siddharth, right? Quickly, Siddharth, over the last 5 years since I've talked to you about the budget, you've sat with me through my previous organization also. You've never given them a star rating. You're always concerned that why were they against, the taxes were always something that you always spoke about. You always spoke of the food and fertilizer subsidy, being the problem. We still haven't details of the NREGS yet coming in, right? So to add to Ravi's point, the devil is in the details, like Suresh said, right? Will we be able to execute all this? And if so, how? Because all of them, you agree that it is an API budget, right? How is that going to come about?
No, see, Vishal, in the previous budgets, what we've often seen happen is most of them have actually tried to use revenue fixes for what is essentially a capital problem. a large amount of time, the subsidies and everything that actually goes in. See, it's very important to distinguish between what's considered revenue expenditure, what's considered capital expenditure.
Correct.
Revenue expenditure ends up getting consumed within a very, very short cycle, within a year itself. A capital expenditure is an investment that can actually get you returns for a much longer period of time. So, for example, the food that I eat is actually, you can actually consider as revenue expenditure because I eat it, it gets processed in my body, gives me energy for a certain time, and then I actually, everything gets removed out. Everything gets offloaded, and then I can basically move on with my life. Whereas if I actually build a kitchen, that's actually capital expenditure because you can use that to constantly keep cooking food and actually take that forward. What the government has done a large number of times, and what, if you even notice some of the political reactions, everyone's reaction was actually on a revenue level, where all of them just said, look, why haven't you given more SOPs to farmers? Why haven't you given more SOPs to this particular person? Why haven't you given greater levels of subsidies? You're just putting more and more money behind this. Whereas what the government has actually said, and there's one entire paragraph there, say, this is the largest amount of capital expenditure the government's actually going to make. The government is actually actively investing into that. And India has the money. Our GST collections are actually the highest, despite us actually still coming out of the Omicron wave in itself. Direct tax collections, the first time I'm actually seeing after a very long time, the revised estimates actually revise the tax collection upwards as opposed to downwards. We've seen the stock markets deliver historic gains. India has a large amount of money. Now the choice that becomes, how do we actually use our money? Do we follow the Norway route in terms of investing it and actually growing the country, or do we actually go down the Venezuela route where we just go spend the money on everything and everything actually blows up? And that's actually true because see, the entire part of inflation actually comes in when a lot more money actually goes into this sort of revenue expenditure as part of that. If you think about it, the global central banks have actually pumped in $25 trillion as stimulus. Yet in spite of that, global GDP actually dipped by about $3 trillion between 2019 and 2020 itself. We've actually seen that particular shift happen. And the entire part in the US about the entire inflation measures actually coming out, that India, the inflation measure doesn't actually isn't actually rising as quickly because 45% of India's inflation actually directly comes from food. We are the only country where inflation is actually judged by the price of onions. Not by the price of rent or by the price of anything else, by the price of onions as part of that. So by the government actually investing into cold storage, investing more into capex, this is an investment into the country, and that will actually end up reaching richer dividends for the entire country itself. Even though all this actually lies in execution. No amount of this, no matter what they've actually announced, will actually come to fruition unless execution actually happens. But you looked at the previous budgets also. Whatever they were promised, they've actually executed on a large amount of that itself. I think by publicly becoming more transparent, a number of people will actually keep an eye on them to call them out whether they've actually executed or not. And if they do execute like this, Atmanirbhar will actually become reality. Self-reliance will actually become a way of life for all of us. And the country will actually end up becoming more prosperous because of the same.
Siddharth, I know you have to leave. You have a minute.
We are moving from the lifestyle country to venture country.
Yeah, that's great. Siddharth, I know you have one more.
So the long-term investment is a point. Absolutely a point. So if you take Awas Yojana as an example, right? You have a good point.
Siddharth has only one more minute. Let's get
I can.
You can push it. That's great. That's music to my ears. Ravi, go on.
Yeah. So inflation is kicking in here. He's got more.
Go on. So, that's my favorite subject with him. That's why. Go on.
So if you take the Awas Yojana, right, 8.3 million dwelling units. That is, I don't think that needs to be coming into the city area at all. It actually, in my mind, coming up in the rural side, it is going to have a better distribution if it were executed well, right? So if you think about it, what did pandemic tell us is that you do not need this high concentration of urban living to be able to go and execute as a country, right? You still can have this spread and work through. So if you can just go back and stick to whatever needs to be done in terms of a combination of a model which is well spread out, well reached out, I think then we are in for a great base, right?
Okay.
And as I said, infrastructure is a long-term game, right? And absolutely right. We are playing the long-term game on this particular one. So that's a great way to start.
Okay. Off balance sheet, Sid. That's always a concern for us in the budget. How is that going to play a role? You know, NPAs are always going to be high. I mean, they are high. How are we going to, record for that? You know, we also have a lot of MSPs and all that going on for farmers and everything. How are we going to handle that?
No, I think so. See, given the fact that the government exchequer has actually seen large amounts of tax inflows, larger than what they actually had, they do have the flexibility and the latitude to actually make those particular commitments itself. And look, all of us have to acknowledge the political reality of where we are as of now. There are two major elections actually coming up. There's a Punjab election that's coming up. There's a UP election that's coming up. There are other elections that are also coming up as well. Any other government would have actually gone with a large slew of populist measures.
Absolutely.
But this government should be commended at the fact that they actually maintain the fiscal prudence throughout this entire stage. And that's
in fact, there is not even a discussion around sugar, in spite of the election being in.
Absolutely, Suresh.
It's anti-populist budget, if you can call it.
I know, even the political reaction has actually been that this is a budget for the risk, it's a budget for that, it's a budget for that. Just because they spoke about investments, they automatically assume that it's an investment into the country. And that significantly actually differs. And that's actually important.
And for, again, some of them, as I said, first time they're talking about APIs, first time they're talking about platform. First time that you're actually going and talking about the social goals, first time you're talking about climate goals, right? So if you think about that, I'm going to have diesel and petrol in a mixed mode, etc., and that becomes a piece where you do not charge that extra 2 rupees or 3 rupees, whatever is the amount that you charge, right? Starting to make distinction that we are talking about a long-term future building out that is broad-based. I think that's my point, right? It's a great foundation to build on. Would I have liked to see a few others? I would have liked to see something more associated with sandboxes, right? Because that's we talk about whatever happened in crypto. I would have loved it if they had said, look, I'm doing all of this, but hey, by the way, I'm creating a sandbox for you to play around, which is both a way for you to go and test out a few of these ideas, right? Or even to go back and say, here's the defense piece, here's a structure associated, and we are going to put some part into a sandbox. I would have loved to see those pieces, but I think they will get built, right? Because the PPP model will force now for that to be an engagement that will move to the next step.
Siddharth, talk about digital university. Suresh, you should also talk about it. They spoke so much about creating channels for education, right? And I'm sure all your edtech startups would want to partake in this, right? Siddharth, you want to start, and Ravi, Suresh, please add. Go on.
I think what the budget's actually done more than education, almost every aspect of life, there's some digital avatar or digital version of it that the budget has actually spoken about itself. Now we look at health, you look at mental health and everything that's come up. The digital universities, they've actually acknowledged the fact that India cannot be served only by a Byju's that's actually doing everything online. There are still TV channels and all that actually end up getting needed as part of that to actually reach people over there. Now, even though we have had the geo effect, geo has not penetrated every single aspect of the entire nation. There's still a large amount of a few chunks of the nation that actually still lives in the 20th century as part of that, and a few of them even in the 19th century. So I think what the government has actually done is the government's acknowledging that number one, education is important. Number two, education can't be solved by just increasing the education budget. We have to fundamentally alter the way in which education is actually being given to all the students of the entire country. And once that acknowledgement happens and that actually goes through, it's important. And they're actually enabling AICTE and these government bodies to actually go and do that. So rather than the Ministry of the HRD Ministry actually taking all the decisions, they're delegating authority to all these people and actually empowering them. That becomes essential. Everyone knows the disaster of the UGC system, and now that's actually stifled education in a country for a long period of time. But by actually empowering them and allowing them to do it, it's important. And one thing to note also, Vishal, as a parting point, they actually announced in GIFT IFSC, you can actually for a university can set up a university over there that is exempt from applicable Indian law. That is huge. So a Harvard or an MIT, for that matter, can actually set up a finance course over there. And they don't have to get registered with UGC. Don't have to do any of that. If that can become the template, that should not be the exception. That should be the template, and we should allow market forces to actually come in so that the best educators can actually meet the brightest minds, and the country can actually prosper. With this, I need to bounce, but thank you.
Go bounce. I will get his questions to be answered. We've got Suresh and Ravi will take your questions. Thank you, Sid, for being there. That's Siddharth of 314 Capital. See you, man.
Thank you.
Right. Suresh, again, music to your ears, right? Universities, you always said innovation should come out of universities. Now I think this will be big.
More interesting was, for example, there are many surprises in budget here. No one could have believed that finance minister will come on here and say that 50% of my population will move to urban, so I need to have urban planning in education, right? So this was as strange or as strange as it gets, right? So, in fact, this foreign university thing, right, is such a good move, such a huge move, right? So, basically, that's just the beginning of the things that's going to start, right? So, obviously, GIFT is a controlled area that's important for them, so they will start doing right things there. But I'm sure that will spread pretty soon. Not only there are. In fact, one thing, Vishal, right? So, government not only said, "I will empower you," but I also gave a message saying that what is that government can do, others could, right? So Siddharth was just talking about it's not just Byju's. That message was very, very clear when they say government says I'll launch 200 channels, right? So
that means it's an unfulfilled need. There's so much opportunity. Right? You're right.
Okay, they say that I'm going to regulate all the fintech companies, and by the way, also my post office will become a digital bank. Right. So the way they are sounding is at one end they are saying that I'm a great facilitator, and second one they are sounding as though I'll be able to launch things which are much bigger than what you guys can imagine.
They'll perhaps partner with you, Suresh, Ravi, right? They'll perhaps look at that, right? PPP is the word that they've used a lot of times.
PPP, so PPP has been used earlier. I think the difference now is that they are now using PPP in conjunction with another body like NABARD. Right. See, earlier what used to happen is PPP is almost to say that I will create a PPP and I'll create a special function to be able to manage that. Right. What is interesting is PPP is used in conjunction with what is already available with a SIDBI and what is already available with a NABARD. Right. Yes, you still have to get them to get there to do that from an execution perspective, but it is easier because now they've taken a step back. And then you now have a very clear piece to say that they now have to go and convince that I have executed on it, right? So the execution now has an oversight layer that got built. Earlier, if I do a PPP and then I say I do the whole thing myself, there's no separation between those two pieces, right? Then execution gets stuck. So I think that process has got inbuilt into this piece.
Okay.
Which is
okay.
In fact, Ravi, I wanted to
go on.
It's almost like normally PPP, people were thinking of PPP because government wanted to have an investment. Here is another way around. Government is saying, I'm going to make the investment, right? Correct. You guys come and operate, right? It's almost like different PPP thesis that I could hear, right?
And this is very important because this allows the government to take the role of a trusteeship and leave the execution to the private party, right? Which has never happened. Usually the control.
A lot of transparency is going to come. Yeah, transparency in this case. Yes.
Right.
You know, Suresh, Ravi, I want to ask you about batteries, okay, and EVs. The interesting thing is they spoke about a swapping policy, interoperability. Is there a particular reason, do you think they started talking about swap batteries instead of fixed battery charging stations? And they said there will be innovative business models to improve its efficiency. And there was also an announcement around an EV park of sorts, something like an SEZ, but for electric vehicles.
Yeah. So
do you think that's a step in the right direction for many of the startups who can partake in that industry?
So the EV park, I think, has better piece. If you ask me, that has better things on the PLI side because that's the heavy electronics.
Yes.
Right. I think there is a lot more to be done on that piece. On the ground, I believe interoperability has to be good, but then that could have been very, very differently, right? As part of my certification of a vehicle, I could have just said that it has to have this particular interface to have the equivalent of a USB A, B, C, or whatever it was versus an Apple coming in and saying, no, I will not use that for my charging piece. So I think that is more a operational piece that they have to go back and work through and then kind of state that, look, we are going to watch this from a interoperable perspective. We are not going to be working through. In itself, I'm not so worried about that, right? Or I'm not so to say that it's going to really make a big difference. I think the fact that you are going to go in and say that you have included EV in the process and you have said that, look, I am going to look after some of these carbon neutral pieces, or I'm going to look at social good and I'm going to look at environmental pieces is a big difference, right? Now, whether that impacts, I also believe that some of this will have a rub off at a longer period of time, right? Okay. So if you take the intersection of 5G, if you take the intersection of whatever they are doing as a defense budget of 25% for startups and academia, by note the fact that they will clearly put that it's academia and startup. And the third one that I'm going to start creating some of these areas that I want to go through, I think is a good piece again, right?
Okay.
In itself, swappable. Yeah.
No, I think, in fact, I felt, Vishal, I think, in fact, that whole announcement came out because I don't think there were enough messages around this space. So they had to find it. So it was the easiest thing for them to say. I mean, it almost sounded like this. But,
So it's
but in general, what I thought was government this is the message that I got. Guys, I'm setting platforms. I'm figuring out how to ensure that you will get the capital, right? For anything, whether you take health or whether you take defense, whether you take education, I'm setting the platform. I'm setting the standards. That's the message that they wanted to give, right? So that's the message that I got from this one.
I wanted to pick your brain.
My strong feel on the EV side, is, I think they're still not sure whether to go with EV or liquid hydrogen or liquid gas. I think that decision is not. I don't think there is clarity in that direction.
So
in fact, that's a non-blended fuel.
I'm reminded what he said is remembered. In the old Karnataka, you would put the milk and say question on the stock. So this is the last topic to say this. This is a EV topic to whatever I have.
I want to stick to agri because agri-tech, Suresh, you also have interest. Ravi, last year, all VCs also talked a lot about ag-tech. She says this will be a new fund with blended capital raised under the co-investment model, which will be facilitated through NABARD, right? So how will this come in? This will be people like you and Suresh participating in those platforms. How will it be implemented? I'm a bit curious because it involves support for FPOs.
Correct me if I'm wrong. NABARD was more for that the leasing model for the agricultural equipment.
This is to finance startups.
To create that.
Absolutely, Suresh, you're right. So I'll quote her. She said, "This is to finance startups for agriculture and rural enterprise relevant for farm produce value chain." That's what she says. I didn't understand how will she implement it with partnership with funds like you, or they will borrow and then ask a startup to come and participate.
NABARD always had a certain piece where they could go in and work through, right? So that in itself, SIDBI also had a certain allocation where they are supposed to go back and put this stuff, right? The fund of funds was the structure. If you notice, all of that already was there. But from an implementation perspective, the nodal agency used to be that the money was held with SIDBI and NABARD was the operational agency. So I think what is being said is that we are allowing the operational agency to also make the funding decision, which is a fundamental difference, right? And earlier this whole thing of whether I'm doing a farm to fork, and notice there's a whole emphasis on organic, right? I don't know if you noticed, right?
Yes.
So as compared to a fertilizer subsidy, or you talk about it, or you go focus on a cold chain, you're now going and saying that my value chain, which is what I meant when I talked about a multimodal, I talked about supply chain structure, makes absolute sense, which means that there has to be other people sitting in. There's another piece that I saw. I don't know what it means. There is a specific piece where they say that it is on financial startups which are going to help in the agri side. Right? There is just one line mentioned. Now, if that is going to come in for agri credit either on the input side, especially on the input side, agri credit, then you have a big win. Then you have an absolutely big win because the FPOs today have never really taken off, right? The FPOs that have been there. The FPO limit was lowered from whatever it used to be, 2,000 or 1,000 plus farmers. Now it's come to a more reasonable number. So you can have a plethora of FPOs, but the FPOs really were not able to facilitate any of this. Now, if you go and talk about group credit, you go and talk about FDLG kind of a process where you go back and say first default is done by an FPO. There are huge models you can build, and each one is a layer. So you take the post office, you take the fintech, you take this particular piece. That layering is where I think people like us, the startups, can start to work in and help in those.
I want to bring in MSMEs. Suresh, Ravi, both of you also love SMEs. Suresh, through your other venture, you've taken care of SMEs, which is Upagna. We talk about Udyam, we talk about eShram, NCS, Asim. They're all now portals which will be interlinked by the government. And they said that these portals will now become databases to provide B2C and B2B services and provide credit facilities to SMEs. right? And there's also the emergency credit line guarantee scheme, right? Is extended, I think, right? Do you see this as something to say that, look, we understand that the MSMEs have been hurt in the pandemic. We want to boost you, and therefore we are going to give you more credit this year and guarantees. Who wants
I don't
to
know,
take this?
Suresh, if you want to take it. I personally am skeptical on that because I've heard this, loan in 59 minutes, loan in 61 minutes.
I think Mudra itself hasn't reached us.
Yeah. So, the where I still am very hopeful is that the GEM, the GEM, the government procurement. So if you start knocking in a few things like the government procurement, the defense procurement, you start flowing in through that. I think the private financiers are willing to step in. I think there is a piece that you do. Export guarantee schemes help, but not at the level that you want it to help, right? In a real MSME, what the person is working through is real working capital loans, right? And the whole service sector is completely outside of that. So if you're let's assume you're a fairly large security agency, you have to employ 80 or 100 guards, security guards. You're funding 3 months of the payroll any which way because you have month 1, month 2, month 3 accruing. So I think there is a lot of work to be done there. I personally think there is a lot of work to be done.
Okay, again, another subject that you both will like: artificial intelligence, geospatial systems, drones, semiconductors, space economy, genomics, green energy. The government said they will go all out to provide help here, and they also believe that these will create employment opportunities. But they do not tell us how is it going to be linked to research, R&D. But they do mention that for these sunrise opportunities, there will be collaboration among academia, industry, and public institutions that will be facilitated. Suresh, you work closer to universities. Do you see this happening fast, or is it a thing that will happen over a staggered period of time, 2-3 years maybe? Suresh, I think Ravi, you want to take it? I think Suresh is.
Yeah. So again, I think good thought. I don't know if that is going to work off on its own, because in my mind, most of what they can do should be done, as we talked about, as AICTE coming in and working through, these universities coming in and working through. I think 2 factors are going to change it. First and foremost, there is a more and more decentralization from the university perspective, right? Whether you talked about setting up a university in GIFT or elsewhere, there is this whole thing coming in, because I think that decentralization and the fact that you are going to have, take Bangalore. From what I know, the new private universities actually have a lot more freedom in deciding how and what they want to do. So as long as that set works through, I think the rest will follow. So I think, again, this is what I call as a good thing to speak about, but really, is it going to fundamentally make a change? Not too sure. I don't think that's really.
Suresh, you want to add? Go on. We lost you for a few seconds, but I'm glad you're back.
Vishal, I think a few things that I could see. This is, I think, the one thing that you should appreciate is there is a continuation in terms of what they say, right? So whatever they are talking about in the academy or whatever the stuff they spoke about education is an extension of NEP, right? Whatever they are talking in NEP, they are trying to extend it, right? As we started saying, devil is in details, right? So would they be able to, for example, one thing is to say that I'll get all my rural agricultural colleges to start doing innovation around agriculture. And we know what is the level of innovation that you are talking about, which is a country like ours desire, right? So there are a lot of details missing there, but there is an intent, right? So what they are saying is, for example, even the idea of getting ITI, after a long time, I heard someone talking about ITI and connecting them with the whole drone stuff is a brilliant stuff, right?
You want to touch upon that further, Suresh? What did she mean by ITIs, pardon me, and how is she going to use that? Are they sprucing them up with new education talent or what?
So they are saying the best way to take drones in this country is by using drones as a service. That's what their looks like. That is their assumption, right? So they want to build a lot of things around drone as a service. And where is the capex from? Again, that they have integrated with that whole agriculture leasing stuff, right? That you can go and lease the equipment, right? So there is an opportunity for you to go and lease that, get these equipment funded, and launch a services play. And once you say services, you need to have job creation, and where is the talent coming from? So they have gone back to ITI and saying that,
Very
okay,
nice.
we will train you guys to manage drones.
Okay.
So from that perspective, there is a closing of loop. At least someone is putting the method to the whole madness.
So the three things that are essentially completing the circle, there is the skills bit, there is the ability to fund a drone, and then saying that underlying, I'm going to look at the GPS and the communication infrastructure and the mapping that is needed. When I say GPS, I'm talking more about the geo mapping and the tagging that you want to go back.
Correct.
And the third one is who operates these channels. If you're talking about a Kisan drone, there has to be something that has to be operated externally. And then that is the service bit that Suresh is working through.
Yeah, it's
Good
it's
closure
perhaps just
on
like
all
how
three.
we get our tractors as a service, this Caterpillar bulldozer as a service, right? Perhaps that model, right?
Correct.
Okay.
And that is on top of that, which is why I said, right, you have to peel the onion layer and figure out what it is. On top of that, you have the fintechs being told that go and support them on this particular
Very
area,
nice.
right? Which is good, which is fantastic, because then you now have players who are coming in and saying, I can actually do this very, very well.
Okay. There are some audience questions. Let's go for it, right?
But before that, I want to ask Ravindra.
Go on.
Ravindra, don't you
Go
feel
on,
that
please.
this is not, I mean, this is almost like a PE guy, right? I'm not saying VC, a PE guy who is constructing his portfolio. I'm saying.
So this is very good, because you're now talk about geo mapping. This is real geo mapping. You're taking the country and saying, look, I have this widespread, far spread areas which have not been touched. I need to create the hub and spoke model. So think about the words getting used. There is a hub and spoke model. I have a platform that is nationwide.
Correct.
One registration, one nation, one process.
Correct.
So
No,
this
that
is
one
a
registration
very
again.
clearly,
The land
Ravindra, just a
records
second. That one
digitization also.
registration thing, no, just connect it with the whole river linking. Yeah, if you do the river linking, a lot of properties will become valuable, and government want to make sure that there is a control on that.
You guys are now.
No, just this the point. So people have not figured this out. It has started off. You had e-Vahan. Everybody talked about what is the point with a India number plate versus a Karnataka or a Maharashtra number plate, right? If you extend that to a registration, your whole GST structure is gone, right? I don't have to worry about borders anymore in terms of movement of goods. Forget about movement of people. You'll always have a KSRTC or a RTC that is trying to figure something out. But movements of goods becomes completely open. That's very, very good.
Okay.
Especially when you talk about multimodal.
Suresh, would you think this is just the beginning of it? We have done, Ravi also, we've done Aadhaar very well. We've done UPI very well. Now with all these layers like logistics stack, health stack, edtech stack, agriculture stack, and the entire supply chain like you spoke about, will it be linked by, and digitization of land records, right? So that means the data like you said, they're thinking like a data economy then in the future. That's what the
So it's a very clear, the message I think is very clear, right? You will have a certain taxation that has to be across. The GST is overarching. That will be the core piece. So if you look at direct taxes today, constitutes a huge percentage of what our income is, right? If you take about income tax is about 15 or 16%. GST is similarly at 15 or 16%. Big numbers. Those are big numbers as compared to, and that's growing, right? As I said,
in fact,
those are growing ones.
The
right?
expectation is that GST will be touched 2 lakh crore per month.
Correct. So you are now setting the
25%.
base that I will take away the secondary economy that exists anywhere else, and all of this are tied in so that there is very little dark space. So if you think about it, you're throwing light on all the existing dark spaces that were around where you had the secondary economy trying to rear its head.
Okay, let's take audience questions because these are kids from universities asking questions. This is from Sanjay. He says, is job creation out of production linked scheme overrated or more practical to achieve in the coming years?
Right,
So the PLI is a very, very good scheme for a very different reason, right? Earlier, you would always go and give something linked to subsidy. And think about it, a social cost where I give a subsidy means nobody works for it, right? And believe you in me, I did my internship in a public sector way back. And it used to hurt me to tell you even today that a lot of people would just take their job for granted, right? Now, if you go and say that I'm going to link it to productivity, you're actually increasing the base level of productivity in all of these locations. So I actually think this is a much better way of incentivizing than to go out and say, I'll give you a subsidy.
Okay, Vishal,
Suresh,
let's
go
look
on.
at the alternative. Yeah. Let's look at
Please.
the alternative. Let's
Go
look
on.
at the alternative. You get a guy, tell him you go and attend this course. I'm subsidizing it. I'm paying you for this learning this skill. Okay, and then here is the loan for you to go and start the business. Right? What happens? He'll buy a bike and he will bunk the class and then roam around. Right? That's what used to happen with all your subsidies. No. Now what you are saying is it's your responsibility to go learn, start your business, right, and start producing. And based on the production that you have, I'll give this, right? So this is actually a great way to get the money work for you, right?
Absolutely, I agree with. I think we should link manufacturing to production and efficiency, and I think both of them are very right. People, I hope that answers your question, Sanjay. You cannot have somebody paid and who sits lazy and and doesn't do anything. I think that's a good thing for India. I think more people should be employed. By the way, they want to give 6 million manufacturing jobs soon. So this production linked scheme is very nice.
Another 30 million.
Yeah, 30 million, absolutely.
30
Amit asks, does increase in 1 more year window for tax incentive really help startups? We were waiting for a greater increase. I knew that question was
yeah,
coming.
Ravindra, I wanted to ask you this question. Right? Why people are so gung-ho about this? How many startups are paying taxes?
No. So I want to ask a very different question, right? You have in 10 years, you can have 3 years worth of fees, and after 10 years, 11 years, you're actually supposed to be called not startup. So let's take Paytm, right? Has it ever made money? Zomato, has it ever made money? So you'll tax what profit you make, right? We are in an economy which is driving on, in some cases, value metrics that is not compatible with this thought process that I'm going to give you another shoot for another year, right? So
Okay.
Technically, I would say that it's neither right to expect something beyond what is expected. If at all there is one thing that you would do, the tax rationalization is something that you can do, right?
Okay.
And you go back and provide wherever the money is flowing back from an investment, then provide the same break, right? One of the things that has moved away is the SEZ, right? Now, SEZ, I don't know if you notice that, right? SEZ is repeat. Now, SEZ was a great way to kickstart something, right? But I was working in SEZ in late 80s, early 90s. How long do you want to continue on a SEZ mode? Yeah, it's time that you get off it, right?
Correct.
So to get away, you did alternatives like minimum alternative tax. You did various pieces, but the more you complicate the system, I think you're going to have more people trying to work their way around that.
Yeah, true,
right?
accounting.
So it's easiest to go back.
The only thing that I didn't like, one of the few things is just this foreign university and gift city. Why you are again trying to say that there is one special area, right? You wish that got away with that.
So I call it the Ahmedabad effect, right?
Yeah, Ahmedabad effect. Exactly.
Absolutely. And what Indian rough diamonds, I think they've bought on the GST to 5% or something like that. It's very funny. It is the Ahmedabad effect. And next question is about income tax. But now, how are we going to answer this? This is from Sanjay again, and he says, not Sanjay, Suraj, pardon me. And he says, with additional time of 2 years provided for filing updated tax returns, keeping in mind omissions and overlooked details, do you think that the government is embodying a passive nature to tax compliance?
Well, actually, I will not worry about this 2 years. I will not worry about this. I will worry about a word that was used. The finance minister said that we are going to move to a trust-based system, right? If they can implement that in at least intention and intent and thought, we are miles ahead, guys. Today or until today, it's the first time that I've had somebody says, I'll trust the taxpayer. Until now, all these years, my experience has been that if you are a taxpayer, I'm not going to trust you.
Yeah.
You are going some Gucci, right?
Great. And there's a question from Arun who says, is this 9.2% growth feasible, or how are we? What is going to be the average growth over the next 3 years, knowing that the pandemic is not yet ended? And will we have to continue spending like this? Isn't it dangerous?
Suresh, do you want to do that, or do you want me to start off and you can?
Please.
9.2, I think, is aspirational. I personally believe that I'll be very happy if we do, 7.2 or higher, or a very
No, Ravindra, this is 9.2 plus inflation. In reality, it's 9.2
in reality,
plus
it's
inflation.
9.2 plus inflation. And if you count that, inflation will probably hit whatever 6-7%, depending on who you see and what you go and work through. We are talking about a fairly large piece, right? So I don't think that's an aspirational piece, but for somebody who has seen what used to be known as the India rate of growth, right? I'd love to do 7 point, right? For years and years, we used to be having this 4%,
2%, yeah.
So, right. So I think that is fine. That's not a problem. To come back and address, I think we've covered the bit on the inflation piece of why is it dangerous, right? So while 35% of it is borrowing, I am very, very happy that almost a similar 35% increase has been implemented towards long-term infrastructure and core infrastructure.
Which basically means more jobs, more consumption will make the economy grow.
Yeah, and it's going into infrastructure, which is not it's not just 1 year I've distributed all of this money and next year I don't know where to come through, right? Because these are investments going in roads, multimodal transport, all of those pieces that are long-term pieces.
Okay. Suresh, there's a question addressed towards you. It's about universities. It's from Kaushik, and he says, what are your thoughts on the virtual university initiative? Do you think it could end up being just another online certification program? And aren't we burdened with things like that at this point of time?
No,
or an actual useful degree that would be recognized by UGC? That's a fair point.
No, I think I think it's just the use of words that matters. Where IGNOU is a virtual university. That's all that matters from the government perspective. IGNOU is a virtual university. But what you should see is the focus on the content. How they are talking about the content, where they are run, what is the kind of courses that they are trying to bring in, etc. I think I mean, this is not media, so I can be politically right. I mean, I need not be politically right here. It's just that you want to get away with I in IGNOU. So that's how it's. So it's no longer IGNOU Indira Gandhi Open University. It's just virtual. That's how it sounded to me.
Okay, Ravi, any thoughts on that virtual university?
No, I think it's just keeping up with the times. It is going to happen, whether they do it or private entity does that. And as you know, there is going to be. I personally believe that people are not going to worry so much about a certificate coming from somewhere. I believe it is going to get much more democratized on skill, which is good.
Beautiful.
So, as I said, these are things that they, in some ways, platitudes. That's good to talk about it, but really you want to change the interest.
There's one more question.
Vishal, just want to add, right?
Please.
There were 2-3 things that were coming out, right? Based on this whole discussion, etc. Right? This is what I heard. One is, how much of the EdTech companies were cracked down in China, right? So there was a reason, and there are some aspects of that which has gone into Indian think tank. That's point number one. Point number two, India is really worried about the lack of talent, right? They understand the talent trends that exist in the country. They are worried about that, right? So, and that's the reason why they are getting a lot of foreign universities. I mean, virtual university will have a lot more flexibility in terms of going and partnering with many of them. So they want to bring the quality content into India, and they feel if they can get some of these, if they can get students to do their MS here, right, for whatever the certification that they want globally, etc. That's one way to prevent drain, etc. Right. So there is an appreciation at the government level to
build talent. Yeah,
talent. The next question is on deep tech for both of you. This is from Arjun. What are some of the possible hopes of policy on SMD electronics industry with import taxes now being reduced?
So it may not happen to the level that we think it will happen, because again, those are longer periods at that level, right? But the signaling is there. If you look at it, the taxes, the duties have been reduced on take whatever goes into a mobile phone, right? If it's camera, if it's lenses, now that constitutes a fairly large amount from a bill of the cost of goods, right? The bill of material that you
correct.
These constitute a significant amount. So they're starting with that. I think as long as that gets linked to PLI and goes through, I think some of this will change. Specific mention was made of 5G, which is making me hopeful,
Correct.
because that obviously
By
has other
2023.
impact that we can go back to.
Okay. So in
Ravindra,
closing, go on,
5G
Suresh.
announcement was to address any shortage in revenues from the other sources. For all the great plans there.
Yeah, there's going to be a new spectrum auction very
Yeah.
soon. So there you go.
Yeah.
Guys, in all, I think there seems to be a positive budget vibration from everyone. Ravi, how would you rate it in terms of fiscal prudence versus announcements towards a tech economy for India?
So overall, I would rate it about 7 or so. Where I would actually rate it higher is I'm actually saying that this becomes a platform that the next few budgets have to build on, right? Which means in that particular case, given that it is a strong foundational messaging, from a messaging perspective, I would actually rate it even a 0.5 or 1 higher. I'll take it all the way to a 7.5 or an 8.
Suresh, what about you? Versus
I mean, I
fiscal
would rate
prudence versus the API economy that we're all
I think
talking about.
it's just setting up the vision, right? I think budget is no longer transactional in India, right? People will go on, government will go and make whatever changes they want in between, right? So budget is not like earlier the most important part of this one, right? So in fact, 3-4 years back, they were criticizing government. 3 years back, they were criticizing government for spoiling the sanctity of the budget, right? So I think very clearly, budget is setting up the vision for the country. Budget is making a statement in terms of how the government will think, right? From that perspective, I would rate it between 8 to 9.
Okay, very nice. Would you say for the first time they've blended rural and urban very well by bridging tech with it, and they've been able to get that narrative right today?
I think that's a political statement they may come back and make, but I think they haven't even looked into it from all those things, right? So I don't think they have looked at it from the social, this is what this society requires, etc. I think they have looked at the overall growth of the country. What do we need to get from here to there? And that's all. That's my belief, right? So
Ravi, the reason I asked that question is Siddharth made a very particular point on onions. Do you think that's the reason I bring this up?
No. So it is to the extent, see, where I think where the piece is, to the extent of no fertilizer subsidy, right? So let's talk about it. No seed subsidy, no fertilizer subsidy, nothing on the other side, right? So to that extent, I think the messaging is very clear that we will not be seen as pampering to the upcoming election. I think in that sense, it's a very, very piece, right? Now, what it did to the stock market today, I still can't figure out it.
Yeah, 800 points up today.
Yeah, because you don't know. I don't think there's anything that was there that was fundamentally different in what happened between 24 hours ago to what will happen 24 hours from now, right? Because this is more a longer duration piece that is being set up.
No, on that note, I see all stocks going up, right from FMCG to infrastructure, healthcare also, pharma is going up. I think this has been a wonderful discussion, a very transparent and open discussion. I think the fair point is we've given them a good thumbs up, and I wish they really become a platform and allow people like startups and VCs to participate in the economy stronger and ensure that the country becomes digital truly and transparent. Thank you so much. And Ravi is from July Ventures, is the managing partner there. Suresh, who's the founder of CoCreate Ventures, is also powering Pebble. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. We'll see you in a bit. And